podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, one of the world's leading international professional bodies which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm Helen O'Grady, a master executive coach and coach supervisor, and your host for this in-depth series on coaching supervision. Each episode delves into a distinctive aspect of supervision with leading practitioners and thought leaders in the field, uncovering the nuanced ways supervision enhances coaching practice, supports well-being and drives professional growth. Whether you're a seasoned supervisor, a coach curious about supervision, or simply interested in the dynamics of reflective practice, this series offers illuminating conversations that will transform how you think about coaching excellence. So welcome, I'm delighted to have Shruti Sonthalia joining me today on our Coaching Supervision podcast. Shruti's got 15 years of experience as a leading exec coach educator, supervisor, and dedicated to empowering coaches at all stages of their development. She partners with new coaches in finding and embracing their authentic voice, which I love, and building unwavering confidence, as well as cultivating a distinctive style to share their unique gifts with the world. Shruti supports experienced coaches in deepening their practice and enhancing their ability to navigate the intricate systemic challenges their clients face. She enables experienced coach practitioners to deepen their roots and expand their professional reach. Shruti has also contributed valuable insights to her research publications in leading international coaching journals. She was previously honoured with the prestigious ICF Young Leaders Award, which recognises as one of the top 3 coaches globally under 40. So welcome, Shruti. It's lovely to have you here. So we're going to talk about power and dynamics in supervision. So could you just start by explaining from your perspective of what you think the power dynamics that can or may exist in coaching supervision relationships?
Firstly, Helen, thank you for the invitation. It's just been delightful to be with you and especially talk about a topic that's so close to my heart. I see power in 3 different ways. There is the traditional power over that exists that most of us have been conditioned into through wider systems. There is the power under that exists where there is, again, an inequality of power where someone is positioning themselves lower than the other person. And then there is the shared power or power with, where it is a relationship of more equality and working together. And like with many, or actually I would say all relationships, that's really true for supervision as well.
And I guess as supervisors and coaching in a way, we're often trying to go with the equal, but actually we might then be blinded, I guess, to how the other dynamics, whether over or under, might be playing out.
Absolutely. And one of my things about coaching, so what makes coaching so special for me, and by a ripple effect, coaching supervision, is both of them offer the possibility of shared power or power and. And I do believe there's something fundamental in just the coaching mindset that enables you to see another person as whole, resourceful and creative, that enables a shared power relationship. And as a supervisor, you have the privilege really of supporting coaches on their journey, embody that more and more deeply and become aware of many of the nuances that exist in embodying shared power.
And it strikes me, as you say, I think the intention is always with coaches to do that power with. But actually, sometimes with supervision, that word in itself, and generally a supervisor is an experienced coach. And so, I'm wondering what your perspective of that is in terms of the power dynamics that maybe are even more elevated within supervision.
Absolutely. And I think it really depends on who you are as a supervisor. And I do believe the who you are plays a really key role into how you supervise or how you show up in the world. And one of the pieces of contract that I have often with my supervisees, for example, is that sometimes you might not like me. And the piece of work I have to do with myself also, it's okay to not be liked sometimes, to be in service to the larger agenda of this relationship and this coach. That has been, I think, my personal edge as a human being over a period of time, because the more I have let go of being liked or appreciated by the person I'm working with, the more I believe I am more fully in service to the other human being.
Yeah. And it's in service to the other human being, but also I'm sort of hearing the in service to the clients that they're working with and that ripple effect as well.
Absolutely. And the systems they serve. So for me, it is all those layers that you are in many ways accountable to as a supervisor and the larger systemic perspective as well.
Because, as you say, the systemic perspective includes the clients and coaching purchasers, but also ethics and boundaries of coaching. And that you start seeing that really big picture, don't you?
Absolutely. And when you are able to name what needs to be named, and when you are able to really listen to the unspoken, I do believe that you are in service both to the coach in front of you, but the larger systems that they serve and power dynamics that might exist in the systems they serve as well.
And so what's your perspective in terms of, I can hear you're so tuned into it. And as you say, you're passionate about this, and I am as well. But I'm mindful that I don't necessarily name them. I might be aware of them, but I don't actually, maybe I should be bringing them into the room more. So I'm curious what you feel about actually naming or shining light on what may or may not be both within the relationship and externally.
I think that it shows up in multiple ways, and that piece about always being contracting, I think has a even bigger place in supervision. That how do you continue to talk about the multiple layers of power privilege that show up in a relationship? And because a lot of my work is cross-cultural, it works across genders, how do you bring that into the room very early on?
So I'll ask you that question. How do you bring it into the room very early on?
To start with, by actually naming. For instance, often I'm working with a lot of men, and men where there is possibly a large age differential. As a woman of color, working in an emerging economy, working with men in developed economies. So there are often power differentials that are there. There is a different perspective on privilege, how we talk about it, and creating space for naming that and creating space for curiosity. So for me, that initial piece about being a learner, that there's a lot that I may think I know, but there's a lot that I definitely do not know.
And so is the naming just naming the difference, or do you label it as power? Because I will often name the difference. I can see the differences between us. What do I need to be aware of? What's relevant for me to know? Those kind of questions. Is that the sort of thing that you find helpful, or do you name it in different ways?
For me, it's often about the identities or how we identify ourselves. So there's more space to bring in whatever is important to both parties, and then talk about how those identities might impact the relationship now, and what do we need to agree on or contract about, that as we deepen our journeying together, that there is space to continue to dialogue about what emerges.
And I wonder if there's kind of warning signs or what you might see if something has been missed or it's not quite working.
One of the pieces that I am often mindful of is when I notice any kind of dependency. For me, that's a big red flag where I would personally take responsibility, where it's really important for the coach to see their role and their ability in their own growth. And the moment it feels like, again, going back to power, that there is an imbalance of power, or the coach over a period of time is giving a lot of power to their supervisor, for me, that is a red flag.
Yeah, I agree.
For me, the more it deepens the intention, or for me, what is a green flag is the more confident they feel. So if it's the other way around, then for me, that definitely starts becoming a red flag.
Yeah. And I wonder if there's a difference then, I guess I'm reflecting on my own practice, between newer coaches and more experienced coaches, because newer coaches I find are looking for the validation and looking for, well, what would you do? And I do push back. But as you say, that dependency, I have to work out, I think, harder with newer coaches.
That is very true. And one of the pieces of that I feel very comfortable about is not giving answers. And especially in supervision, contracting accordingly. So if there is a particular place where I am doing some amount of mentor coaching or looking at a recording, being very clear of that boundary and then playing that role with like completeness and thoroughness. So again, always being contracting, being there, that where does a conversation or a tip or some advice strengthen them? And being really mindful of that role, but that not leading to being put in any kind of pedestal. And that, I think, is the key piece for me. The other one piece that I often, and this is my journey, like I've seen power very closely based on my own journey. And one of the other pieces that's a red flag for me is if at any point of time a coach feels that they have outlived that relationship but continue to be there, that for me is another red flag of there being some kind of power imbalance or the lack of psychological freedom at a very, very subtle level.
So are you saying that it's a good thing and that's a time for the relationship and a different supervisor? Or just say a little bit more what you mean about the relationship?
I think not every relationship, but such a relationship has its own ending.
Yeah.
And to really be appreciating and creating space and being very graceful and aware of the need for an ending. That the coaches that you supervise, for me at least, if I'm doing it well, I know that at some point of time they will fly. And that's the intention of this work, that they will want newness and they will want something different, and being open, ready, welcoming of that. So that piece about ending being a natural arc of the relationship and being very mindful of what is that appropriate time that will enable their continued learning and growth on the journey, I think is really important.
Yeah, I agree. I think ending well, whether it's coaching or coach supervision, it is so critical, isn't it?
Yeah.
But as you say, I think power can play into that. Both our egos of, well, I like this work and I like working with you, but actually giving permission to, are you still getting what you need? And how comfortable are we getting? Because I think that's something that can happen as well. As you say, we don't always want to be liked.
Yeah.
That's not always in the best service. So if we're too comfortable, that might be happening too much. Really interesting. Are there any practical tips you've got in terms of how to reduce that power imbalance and equality? I mean, you've talked about the contracting. Anything else that you think is critical?
For me, there are multiple threads in this particular piece. One is your own ability as a supervisor, and this is for me as coaches as well, to be mindful of your own identities and your own privilege and what that really means. Because we are all parts of systems and we have certain privileges, and there are places where we might feel we don't have the same privileges. And what is your awareness of that, and what is the kind of work that you've done around that to be able to be comfortable about both being able to own the privileges you have and the places where you might not have privilege. And I think that particular piece by itself, that privilege is a spectrum. You will, however, you will have certain privileges and you will have places where you don't have privilege. And how do you be clear about where you stand on different spectrum?
As supervisors, you'd probably say the same thing. For me, that's the supervision that we need as supervisors, to find our place where, as you say, we can talk about our own privilege, understand ourselves, have that self-awareness and have done that processing somewhere outside when we are providing supervision or coaching.
Absolutely. And for me, there's a real awareness of our own humanity. And I think that's really important, that till we are humans, we're going to have blind spots. And that's one of my beliefs. So the humility to say that we need to do our own work as we support other people or other coaches is really, really important. And I do think that it is a lifelong journey. I don't believe that there's going to be a point where I will be aware of all my blind spots. And I think the moment we think that we are aware of all our blind spots is where I do think we sometimes then become aware of where we are not actually operating from shared power, and we subtly start moving into power over.
Because our blind spots aren't static. Some of them are, but they're constantly changing, aren't they, depending on the relationships and the conversations we're having. And our privilege, as you said, which is also not static. It's that continuum depending on the environments we're in.
Absolutely. And also how, like today, globally, things are changing. Our realities are changing every day, and the systems that our coaches serve change every day. And certain things that might be strengths for you in how you operate might suddenly be areas that you might need to look at differently. So it's both a combination of our growth as supervisors, and it's also that the wider context we operate in is shifting significantly. And what does that mean?
I think that's a really good point, that the global situation, the cultural context that people are working in, again, are not static. How do you bring that into the supervision space without dictating, I suppose, and being directive around it, do you think? How do we honour it without overwhelming?
I would say for me, it really depends on who I'm working with and what the relationship and the ask is about. And a lot of my work is across different continents. So, for example, in North America, there are coaches that I work with who work with humanitarian organizations. North America also identity, and for instance, privilege, race. There's a lot more vocabulary and explicit conversation around it over the last few years. So there is a different level of permission and conversation that you would have. For example, in Europe, I notice a gentler version of conversation. And with certain groups that I have worked, that identity beginning to emerge as a conversation. So there's a different level of psychological safety and awareness in how you're holding those conversations that are there. For example, in Asia, you're working with very different dynamics of, for example, not race as much as maybe caste, for example, or class. So each continent has their own nuances and journeys with where they are on some of these aspects. And also how you're trained. For example, Asia, in the larger systems of education, socio-culturally, there's a lot of power over that the conditioning has been around. And what does that mean in terms of how a coach, for example, is trained and a supervisor is trained, and the breaking of conditioning that happens as you're becoming a coach, as you're becoming a supervisor, but as you continue to evolve.
So yeah, that difference between how people perceive hierarchies, how they've experienced hierarchies, their background. And so are there any particular strategies that you found are effective for addressing those kind of power imbalances and the cross-cultural sensitivities? I don't know if that's the appropriate word.
I think one is being aware of power differentials and being able to talk about it. I can talk about when I started, for example, if I'm working with a CEO of a large company, how do I show up? Is there a level that either do I feel intimidated, or is the person opposite me trying to feel like, no, they're so used to intimidating or have a style, that's their style. And if either of that is how do you bring that to a relationship and talk about it? I've actually had, and I was thinking about it today and laughing about it. I've actually had, for instance, an MD of a large bank who just retired become a coach. And in contracting in India, they were trying to make the supervision I was offering them pro bono, which was really like how gender and age came together. And so for me, some of them is overt, some of it is very covert, but it exists. And how do you be mindful of identity, power differentials in how traditional systems might see it, and then how they show up?
And I think you make a really good point around us noticing for ourselves what's going on as coaches and being self-aware. It's making me think and laugh again. Early on in my career, I moved my background, as people may know, as a nurse, and I started coaching and teaching coaching to doctors. And I was like, oh, how is it going to be different? And I had to get over myself. So I think that self-awareness of where do we have those conversations, it's also making me think of that very typical supervision question that we ask when we're talking about this kind of stuff of who does that person remind you of? And that often gets to some of the power or some of the cultural stuff that you were talking about in terms of the stories.
You asked me this, Helen, around earlier about specific tips. And I think two things that come up for me as I was hearing you share. I think one is naming what's present. Like for me, that's been one of the most important muscles to build, that without a judgment, can I just name an observation, let it land, and see where that conversation goes for both of us in the moment. So that's one. And the other one for me is a slightly trickier one, but it's more of calling out the power. And I feel like I find it walking a tightrope, but how do you really support the coach in front of you be in their fullness. It's connected to how I learned to see challenge as a coach, where when you're actually calling out the power, can you get a person to be so deeply seen and yet seen in a way that it takes their breath away?
I like that, taking their breath away.
For me, there's something about seeing what you bring to the table in a way that you might not have expected and really inviting you to lean and step into it.
I love that. I use the analogy, and I hadn't really thought about it for supervision, but when I'm discussing my coaching style, I often say to people, one of the things I do is put a mirror up to help you see what you can't see on your own. But what you've just described is actually, we do that in supervision as well, hopefully help coaches see what they can't see on their own, including the power and the dynamics that are playing out.
Absolutely. For me, being very honest, I work with a lot of women, and I've noticed a lot of women coaches have a lot of intuition, have some really brilliant listening and insights, but not necessarily feeling confident enough to name that.
And that's to do with power, do you think, or that's a cultural part, or both?
I would say yes, it's intertwined in many ways. I would love to say it's cultural, but sadly, I've seen it, I think, in almost every continent I worked with, both as a coach as well as a coaching supervisor. And I'm not saying it's only true for women, but
No.
I've seen it more often true for women, that there is a powerful insight that they might have, or they picked up some really key pieces. For instance, if you've specifically listened to a recording that they might have brought and you're talking about it, and I'm like, okay, what did you really notice and pick up? And what got you to say what you've just had? And they'll give me so much data. And I'm like, what stopped you from really naming that? And that leads to a very fascinating conversation often, because there's so much that they've picked up that is spoken, that is unspoken, but the hesitancy in fully naming it. And sometimes even their own intuition is so powerful.
And it's supporting people to trust their intuition, but also that those decisions that we all make, both as coaches and supervisors, in terms of what we share, what we choose not to share, and the balance and nuance of that.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I like holding is it should be a conscious choice versus a default that you go with. So that's my stretch for coaches. If it's a conscious choice, that's a beautiful place to be. But if it's your default of I feel uncomfortable naming that, or I don't know how to name that, then that's a conversation.
Yeah, I agree. As you say, if you've made that choice and you're aware of it, that's great. If you had no idea that it was even there and that you had a choice around it, then that's, again, something to take to supervision and then explore, isn't it?
Yeah.
And when you think about our responsibility as supervisors, what do you think we can do to help coaches recognize the power that might be happening within their relationships with coachees when we don't see the coachees? We've only got what the coaches tell us.
For me, language is really important, Helen, and how they frame just the whole situation. That tells you a lot about what is unfolding. And being really listening at different levels, even as a supervisor, to what's being told and the framing of the relationship and their approach. For me, that by itself is a treasure that gives you a lot in terms of what is unfolding.
It's so relationship based, isn't it? It sounds obvious, but relationships are complex.
Absolutely.
Do you think we can ever totally remove the power?
And I'm curious by the question about wanting to remove power. I think a lot of my journey has been, and I feel that's true for a lot of people, that there is a certain connotation around power. Martin Luther King Jr. said this piece about power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic.
Oh, I like that. I've not heard that.
And it's been a guiding force for me in some ways in my journey, that I don't think power by itself, it exists. It exists in all relationships. How you interact and what you choose to do with it, I think, is key.
Yeah.
So I would never really want to remove power from any relationship. I'd like to really be able to be conscious about it and have conscious choice and conscious conversation around it.
I really like that it's embracing it. Power is there. And again, that intentional choice, it makes me think about, I'm not a fan of, which we use in coaching a lot, around non-judgmental, because I don't think it's possible. I think what we want is curiosity, not holding on to judgment, and shining a light on when we're making them. And that's, I think, what you're saying about power as well. It's always going to be there. And therefore, we need to use it with love and be aware of it and those conscious choices that we make.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether that's a cultural thing around potentially negative connotations or whether that's just my stuff around power.
I think that's true for all of us. It goes back to, I think most of us have experienced power over.
Yes.
And that's why when we think about power, we think of power as power over, sadly. And I think in the world we live in, it's even more predominant than ever. And I've had a huge journey with power over the last 15 years because I come from a fairly conventional, what is considered a Marwari family in India. So the expectations from women were enormous in terms of complying to certain rules and roles both. So making the career choices I have, doing the work I have globally, a lot of that has been able to do my own work around power. By default, power under was what I was conditioned into. So I think we've all in different ways had different relationships with power. And why I love coaching or the coaching community so much, I believe that the coaching mindset is one of those rare practical ways of learning to embody shared power. And it goes back that most of us unconsciously through our systems of education, social conditioning are taught to solve other people's problems, to not see other people as resourceful and whole. And that's the one thing that coaching does. It really provides you the possibility of seeing another human being as an equal, fully resourced, not fragile, but really this creative, whole human being. And that's why I think coaching provides this enormous possibility to the world, and especially in today's time. So I work with a lot of leaders also and as a coaching educator. And with, for example, a lot of the change in the workforce with AI coming in and people trying to navigate this changing workforce, it really enables a higher degree of curiosity and collaboration.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know whether you experienced this, but I've been aware of global events and people talking about how powerless they feel and how we use power in that way when we're experiencing it power under. It's so interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's so true. Like I sometimes sit with this deep commitment I have to shared power and just the larger global reality we sit in. There are moments I just grieve over it because what we see is also very much our reality. And we have many more examples of power over currently than sadly shared power.
And I think, as you said, that tension, but acknowledging the grief and the emotions around power. And I think for a lot of coaches and potentially coachees, if in those relationships, it's giving space for people to acknowledge the emotions they feel in order to step into that intentionality around how they use power.
Absolutely, I think. And it shows up in different ways. For me, some of it is about voice and choice and like exploring that with what does it mean for a coach and what does it mean for their clients, like and how and where does that emerge?
Yeah. And it's the emerging, isn't it? Which is the beauty. And that can only happen with a deep relationship. So interesting. As we come to the end, what are the takeaways and what would you like to summarise for our listeners in terms of what you think might be helpful for them to consider as they reflect on their own practice, either as coaches or supervisors?
My biggest one would be to be curious about their own relationship with power. What are the 3 words that come up for them as they think about power? And what would it mean to actually befriend power? One of my dreams is that I would really love conscious people to have a more conscious relationship with power. Because I do think if coaches and supervisors were to cultivate a deeper relationship with power, it would hopefully significantly amplify how they show up in the world. And I do think the world as it stands today would gain from conscious people who understand shared power, stepping in more and more.
I love that. And I really appreciate our conversation because you've made me think about my relationship with power. And as you say, I can totally see how stepping into power is something that the world needs. It's been a great conversation.
And one last thing that I can share that comes up as we're ending is one of the gifts in the world we live in, Helen, is just co-regulation. And I think people need it so much. So as a supervisor, and if people who follow polyvagal theory, if you are in ventral and you are a regulated nervous system, The moment you're sitting with a coach who might be in a system or serving a client that is chaotic or very sympathetic, there's the beautiful gift of presence and regulation you offer. And just that by it starts creating ripples in terms of having more regulated nervous systems and thereby a little more calm and clearer action and thinking.
I was going to say, it's the clearer thinking that we know happens when we're able to regulate our nervous systems. And there's so much confronting our nervous systems, I think, isn't it? As you say, and coaching and supervision is a space to really let that be and what we can do with that. So what a joy. Thank you so much, Shruti.
Thank you so much, Helen, for this invitation. It was an absolute delight. Thank you.
Pleasure. And how can people get in touch with you if they'd like to connect and find out more?
There are a few ways they could do that. One is reach out to me on LinkedIn. The other one is my website, which is ruhco, ruhco.org, ruhco.org. And there is the possibility of booking a short conversation with me on Calendly as well. So those are the three ways. And actually, I'm going to be starting a supervision group towards the end of summer. So I think those are some of the immediate possibilities that come up for me.
And I imagine there's other group supervisions starting. So if they're interested in working with you as a supervisor or a mentor coach, then to reach out, and we'll have all the links and stuff in the podcast. So Shruti, I'm really looking forward to seeing you again, because we're going to have a roundtable discussion as the end of this podcast series around different perspectives, so around DEI, and there's a couple of coaches. So I'm really hoping that our listeners can join and hear more of your wisdom from a slightly different perspective as you chat with some other people as well.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you again for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to that conversation with some great coaches from different paths. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, interviews, podcasts, and portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership, tools, models, and the latest industry trends to help you develop your coaching expertise.